So next we're going to talk about socialism, and before we talk about socialism, we really have to define what capitalism is. So capitalism is an economic system where most of the means of production are privately owned and controlled. So people do have ownership of their own labor, power, and the economic market determines how much product is created and how it's used. So according to socialists, the capitalist system creates a class division between the workers who have to sell their labor to make a living and the capitalists who own the means of production. And this, for them, defines the political climate of the state. So socialists are not for usually the private ownership of capital or the means of production. However, they're not against individual freedom, and this is an important point. They actually have a stronger, or at least a different idea of freedom than conservatives and libertarians, who think that most of our rights are negative rights. So rights not to be interfered with, right? Rights to not have our property taken from us and to be able to act in ways that we want to. But we also have positive rights according to socialists, including equal access to goods and services, self-realization at work, positive community, other things that are positive rights. Along with this, we also have positive duties. So we have a duty to support other people and participate in democracy. And the ability to vote and participate in decisions on the state and local levels is important to most socialists, but also that we should have the same kinds of opportunities within the business environment, so that workers should have some say in what happens in the business environment, not just have to be doing just what the capitalists say. And this is important for socialists. So the means of production, so for socialists under capitalism, socialists point out that under capitalism, goods are produced with the goal of profit, not with the benefit of people or society in mind. And this is what we talked about before with libertarianism. Businesses can't be expected to look out for the good of the community. That's not what they're designed to do. They're not going to do that. So socialists recognize this and say, look, because of this, the means of production should be centrally owned. And if they're owned by the state and they're owned by the community, then they're going to be subject to the rules of the community more, and they're going to be forced to do things that are advantageous to the community. So this idea of negative externalities that we talked about before would be taken into account, presumably, under a socialist system, because, again, it wouldn't be a private ownership situation with the businesses to where they're just looking to make a profit. Relatedly, socialists advocate redistribution of wealth usually, because without these measures, they think the disadvantaged will be unfairly marginalized. Though how to do this depends on the socialist system we're talking about. And for Marx, the move to socialism was really motivated by this idea that in modern society, and especially in capitalism, people and their labor have been alienated. So we've been alienated from our labor in the sense that we're producing something that we're not really tied to in the same kind of way. When we were all farmers, we were farming crops that we would perhaps use, or at least we could see the fruits of our labors, and we had control over that. And when factories started to come in, people had less control over their own labor. So for Marx, socialism is not just a way for people to assert power for themselves over the capitalists, but also to realize what the good life for humans is, to be productive and creative in their work. And that's one thing that socialism is supposed to do. So Marx analyzes capitalism partly with the idea of surplus value. He says, look, capitalists purchase the labor of their workers, and a certain amount of the labor is necessary just to earn the amount that people will be paid, right? So they have to work a certain amount in order to make enough money for the company to where the company can afford to pay them. But any work they do over and above that, Marx calls surplus labor, and that produces the surplus value, which the capitalist then takes as profit. So the capitalist is exploiting the worker for profit, and it's not really a fair exchange of goods and labor, according to Marx, because the capitalist gets more out of it than the laborer does. Marx was not really clear totally about what an ideal state would be, and he said that the specifics would evolve organically. But he seemed to call for a redistribution of wealth. He has this famous pronouncement, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. And this is the idea that, some people might produce more, but it will still have to be redistributed in order to be fair. But he thought that trying to set out specifics for planning a state wasn't really the way to make the best state, and that when socialism really started to be established, the government would evolve in a natural way, so things would work themselves out in a sense. And this was tried a number of different ways. Communism advocates ownership of factories and means of production by the state rather than the workers, which isn't always the case with socialism. A lot of socialism now in Nordic countries involves workers owning the means of production, not the state. But the idea with communism was that a strong state would distribute goods and services equally to all the citizens. The Bolsheviks kind of tried this in Russia in a sense. They rigidly controlled the means of production. They called it the dictatorship of the proletariat. It didn't work very well. The workers in the state didn't really have much power, and there was widespread oppression. It did not work. So many governments really just incorporate socialism as part of their government, not as the only sort of system. And they also usually have aspects of capitalism as well. So social democracy uses socialist ideas as promoting equality through social programs and universal health care, but often have a broadly capitalist system. And a lot of Nordic countries have done this kind of thing, but had a lot of unionization of workers, partnerships between governments, workers, and unions in order to have some socialism and some capitalism. So many critiques by capitalists of socialism center around the idea that limiting or prohibiting individuals or private industry's ability to own the means of production is a violation of their freedom. But some socialists respond that capitalist freedom is bought at the expense of worker freedom. Capitalist property rights are infringing on the rights of non-owners. So if a capitalist owns the means of production, that's freedom for them, but it's not freedom for the workers. And the workers' freedom is curtailed by the capitalism. They can't really try to take away the capitalist means of production. They can't really try to own their own labor or get goods they can't afford because they're not paid enough. So any economic system, he points out, closes off some freedoms and allows some others. So it just depends on what kind of freedom you think is the most important. And for socialists, it's more, the worker freedom is more important than the capitalist freedom. So we kind of have to strike that balance. Nobody's really gotten it perfect.